Hey folks, today I'm really happy to have our guest today, Tarun Chopra. So Tarun is currently the president and CEO of Clements Worldwide. So for those folks who don't know Clements Worldwide, this firm is founded in 1947, and today it has past 75th anniversary, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so it has been growing a global leader in this international insurance serving industry. And then you're also serving over 170 countries.
That's right. Yeah.
And Tarun himself is an award-winning executive. So Tarun has previous working experience at Fortune 500 companies like Fannie Mae, Whirlpool, and also working in those premium consulting companies like Ernst & Young and BCG Consulting Group. So we are so fortunate to have you here joining us. So welcome.
Very glad to be here, Stephanie. Thanks.
Yes. So Tarun, what's your typical day looks like as a president and CEO?
A typical day for me, I normally get up around 5:30 in the morning.
Very early.
Yeah, I am an early riser, and I like to use the first half an hour or so just on self-reflection, and I do a lot of, I do yoga and just
meditation, reflection.
Exactly. I do not touch my phone till about 6:30. So that is part of the discipline that I have to follow. For me, that's when the day really starts. And given the fact that we have offices in London and in Dubai and in Dublin, there's always something going on. And so in a typical day, I could be dealing with the troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, to a U.S. embassy closure in Ukraine, to now a Gaza issue, to looking at a new prospect in Asia. So any of those things can happen on a given day, but no 2 days are the same when it comes to that. The other part to my day is I tend to focus in the first part of the day on important things as opposed to urgent things. I like to make that distinction that there are things that are urgent, that they are time bound, that do need to be done, but they're not necessarily important. And people tend to flip it. They tend to work on urgent things, and that compromises what's important from a business standpoint. So first half of the day is spent in important things, making decisions because the mind is fresh. And the second part of the day is spent on more day-to-day activities or more operational aspect of the business itself, or things that I have to do, or things I may have to take care of. I do try to then get some sport in the evening, and before again catching up on the rest of the day and spending time with family. And
you play baseball, right? And
I play cricket, and
cricket,
I play golf.
Yes, yeah,
that's right.
Sounds very disciplined, very organized. Yeah,
most days are.
Yeah.
So and I do travel a lot, so that obviously then it's a very different sort of then it's not a typical day.
Right. Yeah. So in academic, we love 2x2 matrix. So what you describe is basically 2x2, like urgent, important.
Yeah.
Another 2x2 would be what is strategic, what is operational.
That's right.
So seems like there seems maybe some tensions behind those, right? Speaking of, you mentioned a couple of things about making the decisions, right? So like making the right decision. So it's so hard to make the right decision. So if you were giving my students and the listeners some feedback or tips about making the right decision, what are the factors you look at when you make a decision?
So when it comes to making decisions, it is about making informed decisions as opposed to making decisions by gut feel. Okay, and as you the thing is, as you grow in your career, by the sheer fact that you have so much experience, that you start to trust your gut feel.
Your gut feeling, right? Yeah.
Right. So you tend to, that becomes your default. But for you to make a really good decision, it has to be an informed decision, which means I'm always looking for facts to back that decision, whether
Data.
Data or information.
Information.
that I can get from my team, or the depends on the specifics of a particular situation. Like for instance, if we have to make a decision between, well, go with strategy A versus strategy B, it's how much data do I have to back both those strategies? What do I have the return on investment? Do I have the risk analysis on those, as opposed to going with my gut feel?
Right. Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to when you make informed decisions as opposed to gut feel decisions.
Right. So in my class, we teach them about hypothesis testing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like option A and option B, as you talk about, and then you might have all those like options, viable options. And then you need to think about, in order for option A to work, what are the assumptions you need to you satisfy? And then you, with all the data you have, and then see, can all those assumptions met? If not, then probably this is not a viable option. It's
similar.
It's similar.
We don't use exactly that approach, but it is very similar to that. It's we do debate the viability of option A versus option B. So we're doing similar, but not in that disciplined way as you're describing it.
Right, right.
So that's the academic side of it, and the practical side.
But it's good to know
different.
that the rationale behind are similar. So speaking of decision making, all decision making, there are risks behind, right?
Yes.
So I was curious, what are your view about risks? What are risks to you, first of all? And then second, how do you gauge risks? And how do you manage risks? Because a lot of times, people might associate risk with uncertainty. That's what you think?
Yeah. When it actually comes to risk, I actually like to use the example of how, as an organization, when you're looking to enter a new country, right? So let's use that as an example. So what does a typical company do? A typical company would do a great analysis on, you'll do a market study, you'll understand, penetration levels, you'll understand how the business can perform, what your value proposition is. And based on that, you make projections, you come up with, a business case.
Right.
And in the business case, you let's say discounted cash flows, you have your cost of capital. That's where risk shows up, actually, in a conventional
way.
In a conventional way, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll go, okay, well, here's the risk premium, and let's add the country risk premium, and you look at S&P or Bloomberg and go, okay, what's the risk premium for the country?
Yep.
That's great, but I don't think that's a complete picture when you look at risk, because at the end of the day, it is a risk-return trade-off. Everybody does a very good job of analyzing return, but not about the risk. And the example there is, so it's using the same, moving into another country. If I were to ask you between, would you rather, what do you think is safer, London and Paris, or Manila and Bangkok? What would your answer be? The conventional answer is, when you look at S&P, well, London and Paris.
Right.
Well, but when you look at it practically, because you have to think not just from a perspective of a hypothetical case, but when you actually have your operations, your boots on the ground, there are more terrorist attacks in London and Paris in last 5, definitely 10 years than in Bangkok or Manila.
Right.
So which one, if you have to get your people out, or you have to put a disaster recovery plan in place,
right,
which one do you think needs to be accounted for more?
Right.
Because, and that's the part of risk,
yes,
which people sort of undermine, that when it actually comes to operations of the business, you need to be more proactive and spend a little more time. If you on CNBC, there is this program called The Prophet by Mark Lemonis.
Right.
And what Mark Lemonis says is, to be successful, you need three things.
Three things.
Yeah, people, product, and process. Okay.
3P.
So 3P, yeah. So people, product, process is what you need to be successful. So when
Not
you
place, I would add another one, place.
well, the place then becomes
part of the
part of
process.
the, so
Yeah.
you're making that decision, right? Where
Yeah.
are you going to put your international expansion?
Yeah.
And so as you think about your business, you really need to think about, so when we think of risk, it's about protecting your people, product, and process. That's what it comes down to. You typically, how do you protect people? Well, you provide healthcare. Right?
Insurance.
And in terms of your product, that's actually a bigger risk, because what you're selling, your biggest risk is when the consumers don't like it, or there is something that you've said, you get a negative feedback.
Right.
From, and your brand starts to go down.
Right.
How do you protect against that? That's a risk.
Right.
Okay. If you have, and when you look at process, the biggest risk right now is cyber and data protection. So when you take all that into account, and I'm not even talking about other kinds of risks that exist when you actually operate the business, but those are generic risks which apply to every business and every jurisdiction. Simple example, data privacy laws in EU are very different from
GDPR. Yep.
GDPR, very different than the rules in US.
And California has a
very different set of rules. So the moment you set foot, yes, you did a great analysis in figuring out your return, but the moment you set foot, you can go wrong. Okay. And you talked about probabilities. That's where those probabilities come into play in terms of, okay, what is the probability? Is this a high probability or a low probability risk, right? That something will happen. How prepared are you to deal with local jurisdiction, local compliance, local challenges?
Right.
Okay. And then the other piece of the puzzle when you look at risk is when you have a certain event, you've already figured out the probability of that event. What's the loss, potential loss that you can suffer? And what's happening now as we look at risk is the probability or the frequency of events happening around the world are getting higher.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the actual damage, the actual dollar cost is also higher.
Right.
And so that's how we like to frame risk.
Right.
That's how we look at it.
Right.
And that's, I think, the way to look at it as we move forward.
Right. This is unfortunate today. We are in a more turbulent environment. Things like policy, global decoupling, and then wars, right?
Yeah.
And then supply chain issue on top of that global pandemic. So we have a lot of the challenges from the macro level. And then at the micro level, I think we just simply have more competition and more disruption, more even disruptive innovation, right? So speaking that, one of that is probably is this generative AI, this technology, right?
Yeah.
So particularly for industries like insurance and other like tech, what are the implications? What are your interpretation?
Sure.
Or if you were going to give firms or industry managers some suggestions in terms of how do we deal with the potential risk because of the technology advancement?
Yeah.
I know this is a big question.
I know.
We're all trying to figure it out.
I think my starting comment on this would be technology itself is not bad, right? We have definitely over decades benefited from new technology. Right?
Sure.
Internet is a classic example.
Sure.
Right? That's just as rudimentary as it can get. So when you look at generative AI, when you look at the positives of it, yes, there are a lot of positives. And some of the examples from a customer standpoint, or from an insurance industry standpoint, or even from a technology standpoint, is enhancement of customer experience, first of all. Because you have this level of technology available where you can develop such better insights.
Sure. You have more data.
You have more data.
You can make more informative decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll like to, there's a framework that I like to mention is, data creates insights.
Data creates insights.
Yeah, insights create knowledge.
Insights create knowledge.
And knowledge creates wisdom.
I was going to say that knowledge creates a wisdom.
And when you have wisdom, and if you are able to action on that wisdom, you're going to be successful. So you can follow those 4 steps, but not act on it.
Yep.
Then it won't be useful. So what generative AI has done is actually helps you speed up this process of going from data to wisdom, right? So you got data, you have information, you have insights, you have knowledge, you develop wisdom out of it. And so that process got speeded up. And when you look at it from a customer perspective, now we are in a much, much better position to understand our clients and our clients' need and their behaviors. The other place, and specifically talking from an insurance perspective, is a big part of insurance is claims.
Sure.
At the end of the day, it is a promise that you're making to make good in case of an incident, right? So that's the second place where AI has come into play in a big way, where you are now interacting with your clients in a more meaningful, faster, more efficient manner than you used to before, because claims processes have been very archaic. You used to send in, you call someone, here's my claim, and then somebody calls you back, and then they go, okay, yeah, what's the damage? You write a report, and then they go, okay, yeah, go to this, body shop and get it repaired, so on and so forth. That's the traditional way of doing it. But when you look at things now, you go online, there's a chatbot, but then it's a smart chatbot, and it's very quickly able to tell you, okay, what happened? What happened? And it's able to figure out where to direct you if you have a windshield damage versus, a tire damage versus a fender bender and whatever it is.
Right.
And so it's become such an efficient process. And I was, there's one insurance company with which I had a claim, and I had a windshield damage. And they actually showed me a windscreen on the, when I was filling it out electronically, and said, where on the screen is it and how big is it? Is it this kind of a, is it a bird's hatch, or is this a bigger damage, is a crack? And which was so cool.
Right.
It's like you could now exactly pinpoint.
It makes much easier, all the information more precise.
Exactly.
Yeah, more organized.
Absolutely. So that's the benefit or the positives of the generative AI. I think the challenge is the regulation of it. Because at this point in time, who's making that decision, right? So what it does, because it's not regulated at this point in time, there is a risk of bias when it gets, rolled out.
Right.
And that's the piece that we have to watch out for. So the sooner the governments or the regulatory agencies can get with the technology firms to figure out that perfect match and put some guardrails, some direction,
boundaries
around it, it'll do a world of good to everyone.
Right. So it's interesting. Insurance industry overall is a highly regulated industry.
Yes.
Yes. Right. And across the globe, and then different countries have different regulation. So for multinational firms, right? So when you operate in different countries, you will have to navigate different regulation, the regulational differences on top of all the other differences, right? So, but then that basically makes all the risk management for yourself even more challenging. Yeah. I was wondering, like, any insights along this line, like navigating different regulations across the globe?
You're absolutely correct. It is one of the biggest pain points and one of the biggest risks for us internally when you think about our business of, we are in the business of risk.
Right.
It's not just a question of different regulations. What makes the situation even more complicated is it's inconsistent regulation.
Changes.
Then it changes.
Yeah.
Then a lot of things are not defined clearly. So it's not black and white. You end up in the shade of gray.
Gray area.
Which is where it becomes risky, right? Because you're trying to do the right thing. And you're trying to do the right thing, not just from your company perspective, but your regulated entity, right? So if something is done a certain way in US under the regulated regime and it is deemed correct, it may not be deemed correct in another jurisdiction.
Right.
That's a possibility, right? And that's the one you have to watch out for, because for no fault of yours, you may end up violating something. And so that's the piece which we have to watch out for constantly. We probably spend more than our proportionate share of time and effort in figuring out regulations, making sure that we are fully compliant, given how many jurisdictions we operate in. And, we work with, a lot of different arrangements just to make sure that we stay compliant.
Right, yeah. So I think for insurance, one of the things is, one, you are the insurance for other companies. Whenever they have a disaster, they have a crisis, they come to you. But for you, on the other side, whenever there's disaster, particularly, I guess, national-wide and the industry-wide, that's like huge risk, big challenges, right?
Yeah. They always are.
They always are.
Yeah. And interestingly, you brought up, disaster versus crisis, and that's something which within the insurance industry you make a distinction on very clearly, right? Because
man-made or versus not man-made, controllable
exactly
versus not controllable.
At the same time, you're absolutely right on that. The other thing I would add to it is you recover from a disaster and you manage a crisis.
Right.
Okay. And so how you approach a disaster versus a crisis is very different.
Sure.
And because disaster is all about recovery. So,
right.
When a natural calamity happens, how quickly can you recover? Or if it's a man-made, event, then like a cyber event, for example. Right? Or a ransomware attack, how quickly can you recover from it? Okay. Whereas a crisis is something, like the Budweiser controversy, right? That's a crisis.
Yes.
And your crisis is what you're trying to control and manage.
Right.
And so, but that's a very different strategies. But you're right. It's just having to understand that distinction is important.
Right. So for our MBA students, I'm sure many of them, they might want to work for this exciting industry, right? Insurance industry. So if you were giving them a couple of career-related advice, right? So what would you give them? Like, what are the things, or do you have like a checklist for them? If you have this magic list for them, or any advice you would give to people who want to eventually maybe work for this industry?
Sure. I think I want to start with the fact that the insurance industry does not get its fair share of representation. It's always viewed as, well, insurance is something I need, but is boring. Whereas on the contrary, it's a very exciting field and it's a much needed industry, because if you think about it, and I go back to the 1600s, when the ships were leaving England
Mm,
to go find the new world,
right.
right? Those ships were insured. Had those ships not been insured, you would have never discovered the new world because nobody was going to take the risk. Okay, so and this insurance plays the same role in today's economy, right? If you are, take construction as an example, you're creating a new building. If you don't have insurance, no one's going to give you a loan, and you're never going to have a building, which means people won't have houses to live in. So it is a very integral part of our commerce and society, but it never gets that attention. And more importantly, there are a lot of exciting aspects to insurance that, again, people don't know of. And I'll use Clements as an example, right? We are based out of Washington, D.C., and we've been doing business now for 76 years. And our specialty is insurance for individuals and organizations outside their home country. So we don't write domestic business. It's all about cross-border business. It's all about high-risk areas, conflict zones around the world. You know, I visit a lot of U.S. embassies around the world, and it's almost like a James Bond feel. You can walk in and out because we've built that relationship, and we have that brand recognition that they allow us to come in. And it's just a very different part of the business world that, again, people don't realize that's happening. You know, how else is the cross-border trade going to be facilitated?
I really like this framing. You almost make this a really romantic, experience, because in some way that insurance, you were able to accumulate some the resources so that support some of the high risk actions that might benefit a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, going back to your question on, some of the skills, if you want to go into traditional or more core insurance, that's on the underwriting side. So if you love numbers,
math calculation,
calculation,
you need to calculate the premium, hedge the risks,
underwriting,
right?
Actuarial services, that's the place to go. That's where you would want to go. But on the other side is, it really comes down to what your passion is. If you are a sports enthusiast, there's a whole host of sports insurances that you can work on. So you can still follow your passion, but actually work on something.
Work with your athletes.
Work with your athletes. You have a massive sports disability program, right? When something happens to an athlete, well, who's taking care of that? So we do that, and the other example I like to use is airline pilots. Okay, and airline pilots, if they are not flying an airplane, what can they do as an alternate profession?
What do they do?
Not much.
Not much.
Because it's such a specialized job.
Right.
So think about a scenario, and this is real life example. If something happens to their eyesight or something happens to their hand, they cannot fly a plane.
No.
Okay. So who's protecting them, right? Because
professional.
It is such a specialized field that if you can't fly, you really can't do much outside of that. And so we feel really good about protecting those pilots because we build the programs and to give them loss of income or a disability program where if something happens to them, then they are taken care of. Right. But that's, again, if you are an aviation geek, by all means, go for it. And you should be the ones interacting with all these pilots and cabin crew or, hull. That's insurance.
Yeah, so it seems like there are a lot of specialization within the industry and a lot of possibilities. And my feeds people have different personality, different skill sets. Sounds like very exciting opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Tarun.